Hi, and welcome to this fall meeting panel on how to review journal articles. I'm Amanda Halpern. I'm a program specialist here at AGU Publications. And today we have three panelists to discuss this topic. First, we have Deborah Hunsinger, who is an editor on JGR Biogeosciences. Next, we have Ankur Desi, who is also an editor on JGR Biogeosciences. And finally, we have Kristin Cook, who is an associate editor on JGR Earth Surface. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. So we get a lot of questions from people who are really interested in joining the review process, but aren't sure how or aren't sure how it works. So how do you choose reviewers and how do you find reviewers and how do you connect them? Which reviewers go to which journal articles? How does that all work? So I'll start with you, Debbie.
So when we're finding reviewers for papers, the authors will submit a suggested list of reviewers, sometimes 3 to 5 individuals. And so we have that list to draw from, but we also, depending on our familiarity with the topic that's being covered in the paper, we either may know individuals in the field that are experts in that area, and we can turn to them to see if there'll be reviewers on the manuscript. We can look at the list of suggested reviewers. Oftentimes we'll often look at the reference cited in the paper, the manuscript, and look for those references that are key to the work being done and the authors on those manuscripts, and maybe look for those individuals as reviewers. We also do receive emails from individuals offering their services as reviewers and letting us know what their expertise is, and we can make note of that, and if we get a paper that falls in their area of expertise, then we can contact those individuals. So it really, we're looking to the peer community and trying to find those individuals that are best suited, given the substance of the manuscript, to review the merit of that work and the paper.
Okay, good. And Ankur, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd say one thing, I'd echo Debbie's point that if you are interested in wanting to review and you haven't had many invitations, it's completely fair game to email the editor or editor-in-chief of a journal and say, hey, my name is so-and-so, I'm interested. Another thing that you can do that would help is also to have your profile in the AGU profile, have your keywords and expertise, because the other way that we sometimes search for reviewers is also to use the AGU database, which has everyone's names, their keywords, their previous reviews, their previous papers they've published, and that often, and there's actually in our system that actually searches all of that information and occasionally gives us suggestions. And so once you're in that system, you're more likely to show up as a potential peer that we might want to include. And I'm often looking for, a range of reviewers. I like to have both senior and early career reviewers sometimes, because sometimes the early career folks have a better perspective on what's hot and new and kind of up on newer methods, while the senior researchers may have a bigger view of the field as a whole and the history of this discipline. So don't feel like you're too early in your career or you're too new at this to join a reviewer pool. You don't even need a PhD to start reviewing. I've often used graduate students who have been wonderful reviewers.
Okay, and Kristin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, kind of to follow up on Ankur's point, another thing you can do is let your senior colleagues or your supervisors know that you're interested. Often, for example, authors will suggest quite senior people as reviewers, and they often don't have very much time. And so whenever we ask for a review and the reviewer declines, they have the opportunity to suggest alternatives. And this can be a really useful source for us to find people we may not have thought of. And so, I encourage kind of everyone in your network who's more senior to think of you as a possible suggestion to provide to the editors.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, we get a lot of people who do ask about that, and also just generally their early career or their students, and they're not sure how to develop their review skills. So how would you suggest people kind of work on these skills? And I'll start with Ankur this time.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that is, a common in our field is that a lot of things we kind of learn on the job. And certainly with reviewing, that's something where, just honing your skills of being able to read a paper, be able to come up with your sense of whether this paper is useful, advances the field, whether it is, using methods that are understandable and are at what we would expect. Reviewing is broadly a form of quality control, and it's part of the same set of skills you need as an individual researcher to be able to evaluate and qualify papers in your own work. So I'd say just, practice whenever you read a paper of like, if I were a reviewer, what would I say about this paper? One thing I like to do in my lab is occasionally I'll get a review request and the editor will be okay with us doing it as a lab review, where we will have the whole group as a whole essentially do the review. And then we in lab meeting actually go through it, and then I'll submit it as a single review, but everyone will have an opportunity to at least put in there and also to get a sense to see if that's a structure. So I'd certainly reach out to your advisor to see if that is something that your lab might be able or willing to do.
Yeah, that's great. Kristin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, so another resource that is kind of new out there that can help just get a sense for what goes in a review are some of these open review journals. So for example, EGU, all of their journals have a public review process. And so this is a chance for you to go and you can just read review after review and kind of see what sort of things people are usually bringing up, what sort of structure is common. Hopefully you can start to see which ones are good and which ones are not so helpful. Yeah, I mean, and as Ankur says, in our field, we often learn by doing, but we also often learn by example. And so just kind of being able to see a bunch of examples, I think could be helpful.
Okay. And Debbie, do you have anything to add to that?
All those points were really good. I agree with Ankur, like getting practice is probably the best way to gain experience and increase your comfort level and confidence with reviews. In addition to the lab group reviews, I've also, when I was a student and even a postdoc, I would work with my advisors and they might have a paper review and ask me to do an initial review, and then we would discuss their findings of the, like their interpretation of the paper and its weaknesses and strengths. And so I thought that was really helpful, like more of a team-based approach to review with your advisor. I also agree, like looking at some of those open source journals, like where they have discussions and you can look at the feedback that authors have received in a paper. And also, if you've had the benefit of, if you've published and you've received reviews on your own papers, you can look at those for guidance. What was helpful to you as an author? What types of feedback did you find the most constructive? And then try to model your review and your feedback based on that. So putting yourself in the author's step or seat for a little bit and trying to think about, if I were trying to provide the most useful information I could for improving this manuscript, what would those biggest takeaway points be for that author? What should they focus on?
Yeah, and I think that is something we see, at least on our end, come up a lot, where people want to know what exactly makes a good review. So what in a review is most helpful to you when you're making a recommendation or a decision? And I'll start with Kristin this time.
Oh, that's a big question.
Yes, big question.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, when we're looking to make a decision, I mean, the first thing we want to know is the science in the paper good? I mean, have they used methods appropriately? Are the assumptions reasonable? Are their results justified by their data? So is the scientific content of the paper, yeah, to a good quality and acceptable, basically. And so in a review, we want to know some details around this. And so if you think a paper is great, don't just say, I think the paper is great. You need to give some information, some more details, show that you've read it carefully and carefully considered it. and kind of address each one of these points. So yes, their assumptions are reasonable for this and this reason. Yes, their data make sense and they're interpreted appropriately. So give us the information to go on to show us that you've read and carefully considered the paper.
So is it more helpful for you to have reviewers focus primarily on the science and less on the technical, mechanical aspects of writing, like grammar, spelling, legibility, that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to me, there's two purposes for a review. So it's to let the editor know, help to guide the decision. So, and then also to provide constructive feedback for the authors to improve their manuscript. And these can be kind of interlinked things, but kind of the first thing we want to know is the science in the manuscript to our standard. And then after that, you kind of add on the other details.
Okay. And Debbie, I'll pose the same question to you. What's helpful to you when you receive reviews?
When I receive reviews, I think a lot of the things that Kristin said are the same with me. It's like we want to know, first, is the paper appropriate for the journal? Usually, the editors are working to try to figure that out before they assign the paper to associate editors and it goes out to review. But we also look for the reviewers to let us know whether it's an appropriate fit for the journal. Kristin mentioned that, are the conclusions supported by the evidence that's presented? Are the methods appropriate? Do they place their work in the context of the field and where things are today? Are their main points clear? And again, are they clearly supported by the evidence presented in the paper? Is it clearly written? Is it easy to follow? Are the figures conveying the important information and feedback that we need to support the work? And I think that the biggest focus should be on the scientific content of the paper and whether it's advancing the field. Is it novel? Is it a new edition, or is it a rehashing of what is already known? The latter would be less attractive in terms of a paper that's being published in our journal and JGR journal. And then if it's poorly written, I think that you can just state that from the outset that it needs significant improvement in terms of language and flow, and don't spend time trying to correct grammar in any way, because that's just that's not a good use of your time. As a reviewer, a better use of your time is to really focus on the key messages of the work, and whether you feel that the results and the paper itself advance understanding in the field.
Okay, and I'll post
I will add to it, like if it's so poorly written that you can't understand anything, then that also can be an issue, and that's usually if we have language issues in a paper that make it difficult to follow, we might return it to the authors for improvement before it can really be reviewed by peers.
Yeah, that's definitely good to look out for. So Anchor, I'll pose the same question to you.
Yeah, great points all around. One thing to think about of peer review and the scientific literature process as a whole is that, view papers as a structured conversation about nature, right? Written by people going back and forth, trying to understand what is going on in the world and how can we use experiments to understand those. And so what I want to see as in a review is that paper making that conversation, or is it getting lost in some aspect that doesn't advance that conversation? And one thing to think about as a reviewer is that you really have a couple different audiences, right? One audience is the editor, where you are making one of several recommendations, and a couple other reviewers, potentially associate or handling editor. And it's my job as an editor to kind of take each of those reviews, including their recommendations, and make a decision about whether we're moving forward with this conversation and hopefully eventually see the light of day as a journal article, or whether we're telling the authors that, you know, you really need to do a lot more work and move and try again. And so what I'd like to see in the beginning of a review is kind of a summary statement, your 1 or 2 sentence of like, what is this paper about and what does it mean to you? And also for you to justify the recommendation you make. So if you're saying this needs major revisions, give me 1 or 2 sentences for why you believe this is going to require a substantial amount of effort to revise. Or if you're recommending rejection, why you believe this paper is not ready for prime time. And then when it comes to the audience, the other audience, of course, is the authors who want to get their papers published and who want to make their papers better. And from there, really having precise and detailed constructive criticism, right? So saying by line number or paragraph number or section, you know, I don't understand this, or this claim that you make is not supported by the data, and being constructive as well as what would it take for you to be able to accept this result or to move forward, to say, if the authors were doing this, I'd be more willing to say that this is supported, right? Not to make them do the study you wish they did, right? Because that's something we don't want reviewers really telling authors, but really to say, how do we make this paper, given the structure and the methods that they're using, stronger?
Yeah, I think those are all really great points. And then just kind of on the flip side of that question, what is one or a few common mistakes you see reviewers make that you would like to tell them not to do, or just give them advice on how to correct? So I'll start with you, Debbie.
Oh, just 2 come to mind right away, and I'm sure more will come to mind as others offer their insight as well. But first, and I mentioned this before, I think early career reviewers tend to focus in more on, you know, the mechanics of the paper, maybe some phrasing or spelling errors or language errors, and they don't spend enough time focusing on the science. So that's one thing that I've seen. Or they don't provide that summary statement that Ankur was mentioning. They provide a lot of very detailed feedback on figures and statements within the paper, but they don't provide that summative feedback of, this is my takeaway of this, you know, the strengths and weaknesses of this manuscript, and here's support for my recommendation for how this paper should or should not move forward in the revision and the review process. And then I think the other mistake that individuals make is, and this goes along with, you know, one of the comments that Ankur just made, is that, you know, you have to kind of not make this, you know, review the paper that you have, not the paper that you wish that it was. And so sometimes we get feedback from reviewers suggesting work that is clearly out of the scope of the paper. And so it's something that the authors either would have a very difficult time addressing or could not possibly address in a revision. And so that type of feedback isn't very constructive because it's trying to create a different paper than what is presented. And maybe the feedback is this paper is not publication worthy because of some specific reasons, but if it's just that you would have done it differently and you would have, you know, used a different model or collected a different set of data, maybe those options are not available and they're out of scope of the review, and you have to look at the paper that you have and see if there's merit enough there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Ankur, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, iterating again, the need for making it clear why you're making your recommendation, and, you know, which makes my job easier. And really so that I can write a decision letter that specifically says what are the biggest points, right? Organizing your review. So a very common structure, of course, is summary statement followed by the major points, followed by the minor. I think sometimes early new reviewers feel like they have to fix every single problem in a paper, and that's not the case, right? You're one of a few reviewers, and your job is to kind of focus on the 3 or 4 biggest points that you really need this paper to work on, right? Sometimes this paper is going to go through multiple rounds anyway, and it's likely that if there's other points you have, they will be picked up by other reviewers down the road. And I think the other point that I do like to make to all reviewers is to always, when you write a review, kind of go back and check on your implicit biases that you may have on the paper. Are you making certain assumptions because of the national origin or background of the author based on their name? Because you know their names, you are anonymous to them. Are you making certain assumptions because of what institution they're at or what gender they are, or anything like that? And it may or may not be obvious to you, but using gender neutral language, for example, and avoiding ad hominem attacks or saying, oh, this is just a PhD student's dissertation. It's, things like that are not appropriate in reviews, as well as calling out that this should be fixed by a native speaker. That kind of language is also inappropriate. Focus on the material, not on the person. And that's something that I think we all benefit from, just always doing a double check after we write a review. Am I doing this fairly? Because often things come out when we're not thinking about it.
Yeah. Kristin, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Ankur makes a really good point, and just about kind of the tone of reviews in general. I mean, this is not antagonistic. You're not we want your opinion of the paper, but we're not necessarily asking you to go pick through it, kind of, looking for, every problem, you can dig out, even if it takes a bit of an effort to dig out the problems. This should be a collaborative effort. It should be, so, and kind of think about writing the review in that tone, and to try to avoid kind of unnecessarily harsh and negative language. I mean, it's not all great to receive reviews with things like, well, the authors failed in this, or, things like that. I mean, you can just say, well, maybe the authors could consider to do this. And so, just think about the type of review you would like to receive, and try to write that type of review.
Yeah, and I think all of your answers kind of connect to another question we get a lot, which is, how should you go about managing your time when writing a review? So I know, of course, time management is an issue everyone faces, especially now, but should a reviewer, sit down and do it in one take, or should they pace it out? How would you best advise someone to work on just planning out how they review? So we'll start with you, Ankur.
Okay. Well, I often give general talks about time management, and one of my bottom lines is there is no one right way to manage your time. Everyone's got a way that works for them, and the best thing for you to do is to discover what works for you. But when it does come to reviews, right, this is one of these tasks that can stretch out over time. You're often given a deadline or an expected deadline. It's completely okay to reach out to the editor to say, I might need an extra week or something like that. Is that okay? But what I do and what works for me when I'm peer reviewing is, when I first get to paper, I'll budget some time, maybe within that week or so, to just do a scan of the paper. And so what I'll do is just kind of do that like 5-minute big picture view. I'll read the abstract, look at the figures, kind of look at the main findings, and just ask, like, does this seem like it's on the right track, or is there going to be some things I'm going to have problems with right away? And I'll just take some notes. I used to print out papers, but now I'll just do it on PDF, and just be like, here's some things I should be looking for. And then I'll put the paper away, because sometimes my best ideas about something come, in the shower or on a walk or a bike ride or something like that. And then maybe another week I'll budget, an hour or something to do a closer read, where I'll be reading the paper from start to finish and making notes as I go along on a text file. And they might be very unstructured notes, but I'll try to make sure I'm including line numbers and other pieces of information, so that when I do write my review, I can kind of take my notes and turn them into text. And then I'll do that piece last down the road, usually as I'm submitting it. We really, really love getting our reviews before the deadline, but like I mentioned, it's completely normal that sometimes life happens. Sometimes the paper takes longer just because it's requiring more effort or time. And as one thing I know, whenever you start a task in this field, the first few times you do it takes forever. And as you do it more and more often, you get faster at it, you get more efficient at it, you learn how to address some of the limitations you might have in terms of getting through a review. So keep doing them, you'll get faster at it.
Okay, Kristin, do you have any advice to add on to that?
I actually do quite a similar process as Ankur, except I do print out papers still. I like to take them to the park to read for the initial read-throughs. Yeah, so quick read, and then it kind of percolates in my mind a bit for a while. Often as I'm writing up the review, things will start to kind of, yeah, raise more questions. So I'll often find myself while I'm in the writing phase flipping back and forth just to check, you know, does this figure match this table, and does this all make sense? Yeah, I mean, sometimes it often depends on the paper. Some might require more effort. Sometimes you might want to be looking up some of the reference papers in there, or some of the literature. But yeah, I find this kind of multi-step process with a break in between is really effective for me.
Okay, and Debbie, do you have anything to add to those answers?
Those are all really good suggestions. I too tend to print my papers out that I'm reviewing because I have like screen fatigue sometimes, so I like to sit down with the paper and make notes on the paper copy as I'm reading through. I agree that you get faster as you get experience and the more you do a task, and so the first few reviews are going to take you much longer than you think they should. And, you know, some papers, like Kristin mentioned, are going to take longer than others, and it just depends on the nature of the paper. I would say, too, you know, it's important, I think deadlines are important to try to keep in mind, and if you feel already overwhelmed in your schedule and there's a lot of things going on, it maybe is an indication not to accept an invitation to review a paper if you don't feel that you can meet the deadline in a reasonable way. And then I would, you know, make sure that you note it in your calendar and you set aside time to do that review, and a couple of blocks of time that was mentioned, because typically it's going to take a couple of blocks of time. But depending, you know, regardless of what your approach is, whether you like to sit back and give a general assessment first and then, you know, think about it and then come back and provide, you know, more feedback in your notes, or whether you want to sit down and really go through that paper in one sitting first and then come back and review your suggested feedback. Everybody's approach is going to be different, but I think it's important to really budget the time to do it, particularly when you first start out doing it, because and budget more time than you think it's going to take. It's probably a good recommendation.
Yeah, I think those are all good recommendations. And speaking of time, it looks like we have time for one more question. So I'll end with another kind of big one. But, you know, the reason we're having this panel is because there are a lot of people who are interested in reviewing but feel like they have trouble finding resources on it or just aren't sure what to do. So from your perspectives as associate editors and editors, what is one thing you really want to convey to the people watching this panel? What do you want to tell reviewers who are watching? And I'll start with you, Kristin.
Yeah, I mean, for early career people who are a bit doubtful about what they have to offer, I would say we do want you to review. You do have a lot to offer. You know, you do have expertise, and if we ask you for a review, it's because we believe in your expertise and we want to hear from you. So don't be kind of too shy to offer yourself up. Yeah, we value your input, and you should be confident in giving it.
Yeah, and Debbie, do you have any advice you want to pass along?
Yeah, I really agree with that. You know, we oftentimes in our earlier parts of our career are doubtful of our contributions to the community, and I think that you know, if we're asking you for a review, it's because we feel you have the expertise to provide and critically evaluate the paper. And then the other thing is, I feel like, you know, don't shy away from reviews. because of whether you're doubtful of your abilities or your time, because I feel the more you review manuscripts, the better of a writer you become. So the better your own manuscripts become. So it's a service to the community, but it also is a service to your own work, because you can see what works well and what doesn't work well in a paper in terms of conveying key points and key ideas, structuring manuscripts in that way. And so I feel that it's a service that we can provide to the community, but it also makes ourselves better scientists in the process.
Great. And Ankur, do you have anything you want to add?
No, this is good. All I want to say is, for those who have reviewed and done review, just thank you, right? Thank you for taking the time and effort to make science progress and move forward. You know, we all have an obligation. If none of us reviewed, then there would be no journals, there'd be no literature. But don't feel pressured that you have to do these, reviews. It's okay to say no. And when you do say no, what we love to hear is your suggestions for who you think might be great at this. And recommendations are often as much as what we're looking for sometimes, as whether, you have to do this review or not. But, it is somewhat of an obligation in our field as researchers to, kind of contribute to reviews when we can, and to reach out and seek out opportunities to do so, and to, don't let your sense of, your sense of that you maybe are too junior or early for this to keep you from saying yes or from learning more about how to review. And there are lots of great resources beyond this panel online, and from some of our great reviewers who have posted tips and tricks on social media and elsewhere. And there's certainly worth looking and reading over.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much for participating. I think you've given a lot of really great answers that are hopefully really helpful to the people watching, and thank you to the people watching for attending this panel. If you have any further questions, you can either email the journal inboxes for specific guidance on reviewing for certain journals, or if you have questions at fall meeting, you can come to AGU Central and we are happy to help you further. So thank you all so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.